You know, you walk around, but there's still this fear that he's going to jump out from somewhere. You have this constant feeling that he's out there, walking around with a knife.
There is currently an invisible civil war raging in the streets of Russia. Insidious, unstoppable, and deadly. Vladimir Putin promised his people victory.
Во славу России. Так было тогда.
But he sent them back thousands of people who have become ticking social time bombs. Veterans. These men returned home, but not as heroes. They returned with a completely different identity, as Frankensteins. Now, this is going to be a controversial topic, and I don't care if YouTube doesn't promote it. I'm going to expose the truth anyways. Controversial topics like this one end up getting suppressed by the algorithm, except when you force the algorithm to promote it by clicking on the like button. Thank you. They have no medals, only deep trauma and uncontrollable rage. This tension is felt from the streets of Moscow to the villages of Siberia. Those hailed as heroes now threaten the safety of their own families. The statistics now paint a dark picture that is cause for concern. The monster created by the Kremlin has broken its chains and is now tearing apart its creator's home, Russian society, from within. When we examine the anatomy of this social catastrophe, what emerges is not a chain of coincidences, but a destruction engineering project coldly designed by the Kremlin. It all began with the infamous Project K, which the Russian army resorted to in order to address its manpower needs in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin and the Wagner leadership of the time opened Russian prisons and called on people convicted of serious crimes and those with a history of violence to serve under the banner of patriotism.
Наверное, слышали, ЧВК «Вагнер» называется. У вас есть кто-нибудь, кто может вас десятки сроков от зоны выпустить? Я вас живыми забираю. Но не всегда живыми возвращаю.
This was not a standard recruitment process. It was a process of equipping the most dangerous elements of society with state resources. It is precisely here that we encounter the reality facing Russia. These men are Frankensteins, created by the system. They are individuals gathered from the most difficult circumstances who have been in intense conflict zones and now struggle to adapt to civilian life. According to United Nations data, in 2024 alone, more than 170,000 convicts joined the army with the promise of freedom. This number is larger than the total army of many European countries. But the real problem is that these men are not undergoing a process of rehabilitation, but rather one of deformation. Thrown into the thick of the most intense fighting on the front lines, these individuals have turned violence into a reflex to survive. The use of force has ceased to be a crime for them and has become the only way to survive. Now these men are returning, and the only thing they bring with them is the habit of boundless violence from the front lines.
Over the past 3 years, nearly 8,000 Russian soldiers who returned from the front have been charged with murder or aggravated assault resulting in death.
Analyses by the independent media outlets Verstka and Novaya Gazeta reveal the devastation caused by this return. Over the past 3 years, Russian soldiers returning from Ukraine have caused the deaths or injuries of more than 1,000 people within Russia's borders. This figure is not a simple legal statistic. It is the toll of a social crisis that began within Russia. Of the 551 recorded deaths, 274 were direct murders, and 163 were deaths resulting from serious injury. And more than half of the perpetrators of these murders are former convicts whom Putin released from prison, declaring them heroes. The state released someone with a history of serious crimes, taught him how to use a weapon, and then put him back into a defenseless society. This is a sociological collapse. The profile of these Frankensteins explains why Russian society is in a state of panic. Soldiers speaking in Novaya Gazeta's documentary, My Unwanted Friends, describe themselves as zombies. When these men return to civilian life, they cannot perform ordinary human functions, such as going to work in the morning, eating with their families, or going to the market. Their minds are still in the muddy trenches of Bakhmut or Avdiivka. At the slightest sound, The slightest argument, the kill reflexes from the front lines kick in. One soldier confesses in the documentary, "You can leave the war, but the war never leaves you. That thing inside me constantly wants to kill someone." This confession is the clearest expression of the risk on Russia's streets. This wave of violence is not just an increase reflected in police records. It is a change in the structure of Russian society and the triggering of what we define as a third-order effect, demographic and social collapse. In Russia's villages and cities, the person next door has become a source of concern in the neighborhood. The threat once posed by criminals now comes from individuals who are honored by the state and invited to speak at schools. This situation has shattered the Russian people's perception of reality. Who can you complain to? If the person threatening you is a veteran cloaked in immunity, the legal system is powerless.
Imagine your average drunk also having a grenade or two in his pocket. Yes, this is Russia today, with troops returning from the front line apparently prone to mistake their own mother-in-law for the enemy hiding in the trenches.
In Russia, an ordinary family argument used to end with words. Now, however, dangerous ammunition and unlicensed weapons are present in homes. When alcohol and trauma combine with military equipment, every apartment becomes a potential risk zone. Women and children no longer feel safe in their own homes. They become anxious when they see the emptiness in their father's eyes. This is the moment of collapse for the family, the foundation of society. At this point, the concept of the lost generation becomes a strangulation scenario for the Russian economy. While Putin promotes family values, this traumatized mass returning from the front is damaging the family structure. Tens of thousands of men prone to violence and unable to work become a burden rather than a productive force for the economy. Employers do not want to hire a former convict who could be dangerous in a crisis. The Russian business world shuns this risky workforce. As a result, this crowd turns to illegal activities. The situation is particularly dire in rural areas. Ex-convicts returning to their villages exert pressure on the local population. In many cases, when these individuals commit crimes, instead of going to prison, they demand to be sent back to duty, and the system allows it. This revolving door system gives them a sense of immunity. When a crime is committed, the perpetrator is reinstated on the grounds of defending the homeland. This cycle breeds silent anger toward the state among the families of victims. Cases involving women are the darkest side of this wave. According to UN reports, violent attacks against women top the list of crimes committed by returnees. Although the media ignores these stories, local sources are full of images of victimization. This contradiction creates a deep rift in society. These events are not merely the sum of individual tragedies or legal cases. They are proof that the Russian state's raison d'etre, namely its commitment to protect its citizens, has officially failed. Here, the second-order effect of the crisis comes into play. The complete collapse of the judicial system and institutionalized anarchy. The social contract, "Obey me and I will provide you with security," has now lost its validity. Today in Russia, the system is on the side of the perpetrator, not the victim. The law has become a mechanism for exonerating criminals. Today in Russia, the state is not on the side of the victim, but on the side of the convicts. The legal system has become a cleansing mechanism that, instead of dispensing justice, exonerates war criminals, obscures evidence, and silences victims. This is a chaos order that goes beyond even a classic mafia state structure, where the state renders its own rules invalid for its own soldiers, and shelter laws replace the constitution. History is not repeating itself, it is mutating. In the 1990s, the Russian mafia was founded by soldiers returning from Afghanistan. But today's danger is much greater, because those returning are not soldiers, but professional criminals who already know organized crime networks. What we are witnessing in Russia right now is not individual attacks, but the birth pangs of Bratva 2.0. These Frankensteins will soon stop acting individually. They will carry the rigid hierarchy of prison to the streets, becoming warlords who control areas that the police are afraid to enter, armed with heavy weapons. While Putin wanted to invade Ukraine, he unwittingly created a new, underground army to rule his own country. The data confirms this legal erosion. According to Verstka reports, courts are applying sentence reductions to 90% of defendants convicted of aggravated assault, citing having performed their duty as a mitigating factor. A judge can release someone who has committed serious violence against his wife because of his services and medals. This means that the rule of law has been wiped out. On the scales of justice, the safety of an innocent civilian weighs less than the system's need for soldiers. This situation is creating a new, dangerous, and uncontrolled caste system in Russia, the untouchables. Veterans have a status above the law. Whatever they do, they are under the protection of the state. This creates deep mistrust among the rest of society and absolute alienation from the state. The invisible victim of this crisis is Russia's security shield. Imagine a Russian police officer. He is faced with a drunk, armed, and aggressive man. But this man has a medal on his chest awarded by Putin. If the police arrest him, they could go to prison themselves for insulting the army. This dilemma has paralyzed the Russian police force. Police officers no longer respond to calls, answer their phones, or even show up at the scene. A legal black hole has now formed in Russia. The state's uniformed power is hiding in fear of the monster the state itself created. If the police don't protect you, if the courts reward the aggressors, then what good is the state? This question is echoing in the minds of millions of Russians right now. At this very point, the inevitable and terrifying diagnosis must be made. This is the era of Putin's Frankensteins. This is a crisis created by the system itself. Putin made a diabolical deal with criminals to sustain the war, but the price of this deal is being paid by shattered Russian families and a decaying Russian society. The regime has united the darkest elements to preserve its power. But this structure has now spiraled out of control. This mass destabilizes not only Ukraine, but also Russia itself upon their return. Strategically, this marks the beginning of a new era, dubbed toxic veteran syndrome. This is not just an individual trauma or Afghan syndrome, it is much more deadly. Because those returning from Afghanistan were professional soldiers, today's veterans are recruited from prisons, already prone to crime, and now given a license to kill by the state. This syndrome is a social cancer, in which the state has lost its monopoly on violence, and violence has spread to the grassroots. Over the next 10 years, this problem will determine Russia's internal security and stability. The Kremlin is struggling to solve this problem because if it starts prosecuting these people, it risks eliminating its ability to recruit soldiers. The administration is trapped in a dilemma of its own making: either protect its people or turn a blind eye to this structure to sustain the system. And the choice appears to have already been made. Ultimately, even if the fighting on the front lines were to cease one day, the struggle for Russia would not end, because the problem is no longer beyond the border. It is within homes, in parks, and on the streets. As one soldier says in the documentary, "The homeland doesn't know what to do with us." And they are right. The government has no plan to solve this social problem it has created, affecting 170,000 people. They are the living nightmares of a dream. The statistics are just the beginning. Russia transformed its own citizens, and now they have returned home. Those lights that went out that night, those sounds that were heard, were not just a security incident. They were the sound of a structure weakening from within. And that sound carries a message powerful enough to break down walls. Even when the war outside is over, peace will never come to Russia, because the enemy is no longer at the door. The enemy is sitting in the middle of the room. So what are your thoughts on this topic? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing us.